All right, welcome to another episode of Why This Beer. Join us as we discuss all the things that make our craft beer scene unique and the people that help sculpt these great brews. I'm Aslan Graves of Main Street Brewing, and as always, joined by Darren Binema, Neighborhood Brewing, and Yellow Dog Penticton.
Hey, folks.
And today we've got a great guest, Euan Thomson, Dr. Euan Thomson, of Raft Labs.
That's right.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me here, you guys.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure. So we like to just get into things with a little bit of an intro. How did you get into craft beer? Oh, and just for those who don't know, Raft Labs, not just any laboratory specific to quality control and analysis data for brewing and fermentation. But yeah, how'd you get into craft beer?
Yeah, I got to credit a few people with that. I was coming out of grad school in Edmonton, kind of 2012, 2013, wrapping up my PhD there. And I met a guy named Chase at Brewing and just started nerding out about beer because I was really into the craft beer scene at that time, which was tiny in Edmonton. It was like 2 breweries, 3. I think Yellowhead had just started up. There's maybe 3 breweries. They're currently like 30 to 40 probably. And so Chase, I was just like, hey, like, could your industry use a guy like me coming out with a bunch of microbiological experience and knowledge around that stuff? And he was like, yeah. He's like, show up tomorrow. Let's get some plating done on the packaging line. And right away we found some stuff. I was using some really interesting media that I'd never used before, and like troubleshooting some stuff and they were just like treating me as the expert because I had microbiological experience. I had no idea how things worked on a packaging line. And we were able to actually...
No one knows. Yeah.
No, exactly. What does happen?
Yeah.
And we were able to figure out some really useful things for them, like that their fob water was kind of infected and possibly causing problems for them. And so yeah, I went down to Village where my friend Andrew was working at the time, and he took me into Village in Calgary that had just started up, and I was able to kind of do the same thing. So then I landed in Victoria, and I just had these few days of experience working on microbiology in a couple of breweries on a volunteer basis, and Phillips just kind of hired me on the spot as their new QC person, and that kind of took me down the next 6 years of life in the brewing industry. Yeah.
So was that literally your first time running a lab, essentially, being the head guy for it?
It was, yeah. And I was on my own in this little kind of broom closet in the back corner of Phillips, as many labs start out as in craft breweries. And we built from there. And by the time I left, it was a team of 5 or 6 of us at any time. We had kind of a really central position in the brewery. We were running a lot of samples. We were doing a lot of interfacing with the breweries, with the malting plant, with the distillery, with sales. Everybody was coming to us for troubleshooting and problem solving, and we were really making big business decisions within those few years of getting started. So it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of moving parts during that time at Phillips, and I owe those guys a lot for putting so much faith in me at that time.
That's sweet.
Yeah, real sink or swim moment there.
Yeah.
There were a few.
Yeah, it's funny that you talk about Edmonton. I think that I was also graduating at the same time in 2012, and I remember those times. And we bought a few kegs at that time from Amber's,
yeah,
and then also Alley Cat as well. And yeah, there was just I think 2 or 3 breweries. That was it. I think they had regulations in Alberta that were kind of prohibitive to smaller craft breweries, so you had to be kind of big in order to make it, and that was the tough part for them. But yeah, it's crazy to see how much it's changed.
Yeah, no kidding. And it's such a good community and such a thriving community hub that each one of these places sets up. It's in a place like Edmonton, it's desperately needed because there's really nothing going on in a lot of the neighborhoods in that city. And you throw a brewery in there, and all of a sudden the whole neighborhood changes. The place I used to live was kind of wedged right in between where Alley Cat and Amber's were. I would have been a stone's throw from Blind Enthusiasm if I was living there now. There's, and Sea Change and Bent Stick and all these other places. So it's just, it's really changed the face of that whole neighborhood. And I think in a good way that it's one of the really huge positive things that the craft brewing can do in a city or in a rural area, like non-urban areas too, benefit hugely.
Yeah, it can really help build like a sense of community, a sense of like local pride, or it's kind of neat seeing that develop of like,
Yeah.
So with consumer education growing and like, I'd say everybody's developing a discerning palate. Was there like an aha moment that you're like, okay, I can take my knowledge and like, put together some of the QC packages you do with Raft Labs and make it more accessible to other breweries?
Yeah, I was planning a move to Victoria anyway, or sorry, from Victoria to Calgary anyway. My partner had finished her PhD and was getting ready to start a postdoc in Calgary. And this is like at the time she was just guzzling Squirrel Chaser at the time. This is why I want to come back to this later, because this is one of the beers we're talking about tonight. But
yeah.
This, that's because she credits it with getting her through her PhD. We finished all that up. We went on to Calgary and landed there. And I was kind of looking around and saying like, okay, things have changed a lot since I first started thinking about what it would be like to run a QC lab in a place like Alberta, when there were only, 6, 8 craft breweries at the time. Now there's 60 in Calgary, 40 in Edmonton. Like there's an absolutely huge opportunity to actually run something that is useful to the industry, that provides something that nobody else could do for themselves. And from day one, it was, Annex and Cabin and Cold Garden and New Level and all these breweries were coming to us and saying like, okay, here's what we need. Here's how you build this company, and go. And so I launched the company basically the week that COVID hit. We got out of the first month inexplicably, and everybody was still behind us. Everybody was still like, yeah, perfect. Keep going, like keep showing up. We need you here. And it just grew from there. It was entirely word of mouth. We never did really any meaningful marketing, and it's just breweries telling their friends like, you got to use these guys, and that's really how we've grown over the years. And we're now working pretty regularly with people across the country. We're still very Western Canadian focused, but we've got clients all the way to Newfoundland now on occasion.
Nice,
cool. I guess all those like early days of COVID, everyone was canning a little extra. Now they gotta make sure their cans are gonna stand the test of time.
Yeah, exactly. That package quality importance was never more important.
Yeah,
we did this kind of cool thing, like right as COVID broke. I got a call from Andrew at Annex, Andrew Bullied, and he was like, hey, I feel terrible right now. Like this gloom in the pit of my stomach, it just won't go away. Those first few days when everybody was like stocking up on toilet paper and at Costco and dog food and everything, and flour had run off the shelves and everything like that. And Andrew was just like, we got to do something. And so we launched this idea to basically build like an open source hand sanitizer protocol. And so that actually kind of helped us in a way, because it got our name on the map by putting out all this free information. We're just like, hey, here's how we're doing it. Like, we're putting it into cans. Is it a good idea? We don't know. Like, this stuff is needed out there. So we're just going to try and see how it goes and run as scientific a process here as we can, and testing and trying to keep it safe. And, through that process, we were able to actually get our name out, just because people were coming to us already in this really dire moment for help. All these breweries wanted to make hand sanitizer and do it safely. This whole new thing. So it was kind of one of those fun projects you get hauled into, and takes a couple months before I put my head back up.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a crazy time.
So like lab work can be like a pretty daunting thing. Like at the end of the brew day or cellar day, what do you think are some tests that like breweries should be doing and are easy to do? And then what's some stuff that like, I don't know, it's probably best to leave it to the professionals.
Someone else to do. Yeah.
So I got to stop into Penticton, as you do when you're driving down the Trans-Canada Highway out to Victoria. You just pop into Penticton real quick, and got to sit down with Darren yesterday, and we were talking a little bit about this, like what are the sorts of things that are easy to do, and one of the key things that I think a lot of people should be doing that aren't. It's so easy, is to make sure that your heat exchanger, your oxygen stone, all that is running uncontaminated, because a lot of issues in breweries, unsurprisingly, come from really early and kind of low level contamination in your wort, because wort is just the perfect medium for growing microbes of all types, whether it's yeast or bacteria. All kinds of things can grow in it. And because there's no big pH drop yet, because there's no alcohol yet, like pretty much anything can grow as long as it can survive the hops. So making sure that your wort's not spoiling is really key, and you can do that. I was telling Darren about this with Whirl packs. They're basically free, really, really cheap to use, and just make sure. So you can look into protocols for that. I would recommend that for any brewery, just to make sure you're good on the hot side as it transitions to the cold side.
Yeah, and it's like a little bag that you fill up with like your wort stream, and then you were saying you like just kind of seal it. If you see the bag start to grow, and you haven't pitched any yeast at that point, it's just like wort, and you probably have something else is growing inside of your wort that you hadn't planned on, essentially, right?
If there's any sign of growth in there, then you got trouble. So you gotta go and clean out that heat exchanger or the oxygen stone or whatever it is. We also kind of arrived at another point as well while we were chatting, and just this idea that like lots of people out there could do bacterial and microbiological plating. It's not magic. It is a skill that lots of people could learn how to do. The question is, are you going to do it, and do you trust your teams to be able to do it when it's needed the most? And this is where a lot of breweries get into trouble. We hear the same story all the time, is breweries have a QC person. That QC person was also a seller person and a brewer, or, doing packaging every now and then, or getting pulled into all these different jobs. And suddenly things get really busy in the summer and they stop doing the job because it's the first thing to fall off, because it's not necessarily production oriented. You don't need to do the QC work to get beer out the door. You should, but you don't physically. And so as a result, that's the first thing to fall off when things get really busy. And that's also when the most contamination events happen. It's when the most mistakes happen in the brew house. It's when people get the most tired. They really run off their feet in those busy months of the year when QC is most needed. So we were talking a lot about this. It's just like this idea that absolutely, like, plating is something, if you have the capacity to do it, if you can trust that somebody's going to stay on top of it, bacterial work, looking for wild yeast in the brewery, all that stuff, really, really valuable. You cannot replace that with any other activity that you do. You really do need to know what your microbiology is doing inside your brewery in order to protect your brewery from the sort of like existential meltdown that we see from some breweries every now and then. You see the Instagram things where it's like, brewery is shut down for the next like 4 weeks while we have to go in and eviscerate the entire place and make sure that there's not a single cell alive.
Hoses.
Yeah, it's like a whole new megaspora that's you've never heard about is growing. And you're like, oh no, what is happening? There's so many opportunities for like these infections to happen. So many steps of the way, right? Like as soon as you're casting out, it's like every step there's a possibility for some sort of for something to happen, right? And some are easier, lower hanging fruit to clean, and some are harder, like things like CO2 nipple or whatever, right? Like it can be just innocuous or it can be obvious, and that's the hardest thing to diagnose for sure.
And stuff that should be working that isn't working. Sometimes you get check valves that fail. We had one real nightmare scenario that hit one brewery, and then we saw it again another year later with a different brewery, and one in BC, one in Ontario. And the problem was that beer got back up through a check valve on a bright tank, and that beer never should have backed up through the check valve. The check valve shouldn't have failed. It should have been checked as well. Like, these things need to be inspected from time to time. And so it went up backwards into the CO2 line, and it ran all the way to the CO2 regulator. And because it made it all the way back there, it meant it hit the manifold, and that bacteria that was now carried inside that beer, because it's a perfect anaerobic environment with beer, which is like you said, kind of like that hotspot, perfect habitat for things like megasphaera, these strict anaerobic bacteria that love beer. It got blown forward to every single bright tank. And so for months, that every single bright tank was being hit with these bacteria. Some beers were susceptible, some weren't. So it made it really hard for them to trace the issue back to the CO2 line. So we ended up helping them sort that out, and both breweries got through it in the end. But it was like, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars of losses just because they didn't think to rip out some old braided vinyl hoses and replace them, or to do those basic inspections and that basic plating that would have helped identify those sorts of organisms.
For something like that, are you plating like different parts of the brewery to figure out where things are, high in that kind of those microbes there or that bacteria?
For sure. Some bacteria are really hard to plate. If you want to get kind of nuanced about it, like Megasphaera, which is the bacteria that makes your beer taste like diapers and vomit. It is usually only going to be found in really anaerobic atmospheres. It can sit in biofilms in some places under yeast, but like it really enjoys high CO2 environments where beer splashes around. So hoses that hold CO2 that somehow get exposed to beer are the favorite habitat for them. And so what we would do is like look in the finished beer, start at that farthest end in the packaged product because we know that we'll catch it there, and then you work your way back through the process to figure out where the process step is, where it drops off and you can't detect the problem anymore, and then you can kind of triangulate from there and say, okay, we found it here, we didn't find it here, we found it in one can, we didn't find it in the next can. What does that say? Is it happening at the packaging line? Is it happening, at a valve or whatever? And then you can, almost narrow it down to a single fill valve or something like that once you get to that level of detail. But hopefully, if you're kind of doing regular plating, you just catch these issues early, and you're like, okay, we got a problem. It's not spoiling beer yet, but it's a problem, and you can stay 2 steps ahead of it instead of reacting to it in the peak summer months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Must be pretty dang rewarding when you do figure it out. You're like, this is the spot right here. Like, it's that one single O-ring.
That's the grand slam of the raft world right there. We love those moments.
We got him, guys.
Yeah, we got him. We got our guy.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. We talked a bit about like finding infections or things like that. What about like maybe the more positive side of like making a beer that is not infected, or like kind of improving upon it? Like, where do you find that you've had successes there?
Yeah, you also have a program where you kind of like analyze award-winning beers and kind of help to try and pass along some of what may be the thing that helps them stick out.
That was a really fun thing we also did in that first year of operation. We repeated it again afterwards, but in 2020 we looked at all the Alberta Beer Award winners, and we took about 33 beers that had been entered, whether they had won, gotten gold medal, gold, bronze, silver, or had done really poorly, and we analyzed like what was it that made them do really well or do really poorly. And we found all these different things out about them. Obviously contamination was a bad thing, but we were looking at things like free amino nitrogen as well, which is good indication that you're at acetaldehyde risk if your FAN is really high. And FAN is just like amino acid concentration. And the reason that it helps you learn about acetaldehyde risk is because yeast produce acetaldehyde when they're unhealthy. And if yeast are not healthy, then they're not taking up very much FAN during fermentation. So you can measure the final fermentation of a beer versus where it should be based on its malt bill, and kind of figure out if the yeast is underperforming, overperforming, or just right in the sweet spot. And so we were able to help brewers out with some of those guiding principles around like how you can probably win some awards. We've repeated this on hoppy beers, based on like judges' feedback. We've analyzed judges' feedback and put that into spreadsheets. Hundreds of feedback points from judges. That was the 2022 awards. So yeah, we really like digging into that stuff. I think there's so much there that brewers could learn about how their beer is being judged, whether or not they need to worry about this or that thing. Bitterness in a hazy IPA, for example. It comes up a lot with these sorts of analyses, and how to address it ideally is start to come up with some ideas around how they can tinker with their beers. So it was cool. Like at the BC Beer Awards this year, this fall, I was hanging out with I think I saw both you guys there, or in the city, at least around that time. And I was chatting with I was chatting with Twin City again, and because we've been working with them over the last couple of years, and I just kind of offhandedly I was going through Port Alberni last March for my dad's 80th birthday. We were going to spend that out in Bamfield, and I walked into Twin City and just bought a whole bunch of their beer and just took it out to Bamfield with me and tasted it all. At the end of the weekend, I just shot them kind of off the cuff, just like a little email, just saying like, here's what I found, take it or leave it. Just some thoughts about, where you guys are at. Anyway, they came up to me at the awards show and they were like, we took your advice and we put it into full practice, like everything. We tore everything apart. We looked at all of our recipes. We were like, and they were like, every one of the beers that we won awards for that got us the brewery of the year was a beer that you had commented on in that email. I don't know how accurate that is, and I'm certainly not taking credit for their win. I'm just pointing out that those guys responded to feedback in a way that was like so enthusiastic. They really, really embraced it. And I think there's a lesson there for all breweries of just like, customers know your stuff. And then when they provide feedback, it's because they're trying to help usually. So it's good to sort of take that to heart, and to, good things can happen from being kind of humble in that way and approaching it with curiosity. Yeah.
Yeah. Helps make awesome beer to start with, which those guys do.
Yeah.
And then, but also I think, you're right. Like taking the feedback to heart is like definitely critical too. I know like a lot of brewers can have a hard time with that. It's like someone criticizes your kid or something like that. No, it's like they're perfect. But I think you're right. Like the consumer is often right. Like they're the ones drinking your beer more than you are. I always think like I can't possibly drink as much as some of these people do of like one specific beer, right? Like they know it probably
tried and
more
true
than I do, right?
Yeah.
So it's
and they're not drinking in a vacuum either. Like they're drinking one beer beside another, and they're really and a lot of the time people really fixate on one style for a while, and so they know all the good beers in that style, and they're comparing your beer against those. So having people that have that sort of wide frame of reference is incredibly valuable. Those people, they should be on the payroll because they're doing all your hard work for you, and you don't need to go out and buy a bunch of other breweries' beers to sit down and spend a whole morning tasting stuff side by side, which is something all breweries should be doing, but it takes a lot of effort.
Making sure that everybody's like, you have a panel, you're all getting it in. But it's like when you chat with, you make a tweak on a core product or something, and a regular's like, hey, did you change something? It's like, I'm always like, oh no, is this a good or a negative? Did I change something?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
And, but those, I'm like, man, the beer better than I do. Like, you've been a regular here longer than I've been at the brewery. Like, the fact that
it works both ways. Sometimes you get people that know products so well, they just know when something's off, and they'll let you know about that. And if a recipe has been changed or something like that, you gotta seek that feedback out however you can, and really respond to it.
Yeah, for sure.
You got you already talked a little bit about the Megasphere stuff. Yeah. You got any like really big horror stories?
Yeah. Every
names.
every couple of weeks we hear about news. I think there's a fun one, like a little bit more of a fun one that has come up just because it's come up twice in the last month, and it's clients, we're working with that had, increasing plating data, where like we're trending their data over time. We're looking at it. We're always analyzing stuff and looking for patterns. And when we see microbiological numbers creep up, like in their finished product, we're going to go back to them and say, okay, something's going on. We got to figure this out. And it's happened twice in the last couple of months now, with our clients, where we've gone back to them and said, like, there's something going on in your brewery. You might want to check like this and that and that. And sure enough, for both of them, and this is the first time this has happened, where it's like there's been such a pattern of this, but they both scoped their hoses, and they both found like cracks that had stuff growing in them. One of them described it as like a black, like hand looking thing of mold. It was like a star of like black mold growing inside this hose crack. And they tore that out. They swabbed it. They pulled it. They did everything with it from that point. And sure enough, it was like it just showed this dog's breakfast of microbiological activity. Perfect kind of thing for for infecting your beer right at the beginning of your process, right in your wort house.
Yeah, right off the get go.
We've had others where one brewery came to us a while back, and it was one of these like big ones, the shutdown type scenario where like the brewery had to literally stop producing because it was so bad. And we were able to trace that issue back to, it was a lactobacillus contamination, and it was taking too long to spoil. Like it was taking so long that they couldn't detect it in-house. It had to like get into packaging and be in the market for a while before it would kind of come back to them and start to show the spoilage issue, really slow growing lactic acid bacteria. And it was getting in at the heat exchanger. They had some issue where like a bunch of grain got into the heat exchanger. So something happened where a bunch of the mash got into the boil that then got sucked through the heat exchanger and just created all kinds of blockages and clogs. And so when they tore down their heat exchanger, they actually found like whole bits of grain that had somehow made it in there, and it hadn't been cleaned over the last year, hadn't been looked at, and they hadn't been doing their wort testing. And so when they came to us, they were in the middle of this shutdown, and that took us, it didn't take us too long because we were able to like trace it upstream pretty quickly. But it was one of those ones, just like, it's a good thing you guys shut down because every single beer you make is being hit by this thing, and most of them are susceptible to this bacteria.
Well, this is nightmare fuel here.
Yeah, I'm like, man, I'm going to be awake at night. Like, what haven't I gone through?
We're going to have to put a disclaimer at the start of this podcast. Like, if you don't want to sleep tonight, and I'm just like, I'm making a list of like, okay, the heat exchanger. Okay, we got a scope. I got to go on Amazon, get a scope for my hose now. Like, oh man, it's crazy. But it's true. There's so many spots where it can be a problem. Oh man.
And when you finally find it, sometimes it's just so obvious too. Like, I was walking around one brewery recently, just hanging out with their brewers and like just poking at stuff. And one of them like hadn't really been looking at things with a critical eye for a while. They've been so busy just like doing their job. One of them just like grabbed a hold of one of the hoses and just like kind of stared at it and kind of did this little cockeyed thing for a sec. And they were like, oh, that's not right. And the hose had like completely like the ring had kind of like started protruding through, and you could see that it was like broken. It was broken right through the plastic and the rubber. And they'd been using it. It had just been in regular circulation in the brewery, moving from one job to another. And totally unbeknownst to them, they were just like probably contaminating every beer. And not every contamination event results in spoilage, but certainly you wait long enough, it will.
Give things long enough to grow, it'll happen.
Yeah. So it can be obvious if you just kind of start to look around and like, well, should we be doing things this way? Have we pulled out those sight glasses recently? Have we replaced that braided hose? Like, I don't know. There's so many moving parts.
It's amazing when you go through like your like pump seals or like all of your gaskets and stuff, and it's like how much they can degrade and crack, especially like everything on the HLT or something like that. And, it's the wear and tear happens pretty quick, and sometimes it's hard to like go through and check it all out, but it's definitely worthwhile.
We're asking a lot from this equipment, right? Even down to the pumps and the metal parts as well, the piping. And I think that the reason that we've started to see this big uptick in contamination events over the last year or two, certainly from our experience, we're seeing a lot more right now than ever before, is because a lot of these breweries are aging at about the same rate. So a lot of them came online in like 2017, 2018, especially in Alberta. That was a huge boom for breweries, and they all came on with similar parts, similar hoses, and started producing similar volumes at the same time. And all that stuff degraded at the same time. And so you're at a position where breweries are trying to hold on to old equipment, avoid having to tear stuff apart and really look at it. And I think those breweries that are kind of have that mechanical inclination aren't afraid to tear down their pumps, tear apart their heat exchanger, that sort of thing every so often. are really at an advantage right now, or the people that can build their own parts. It's kind of like that. The people that have a machinist on site and that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
It's unfair, but it really
Yeah.
does help.
Yeah.
I am the machinist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you sent over that awesome photo after I mentioned that you're a bit of a dinosaur guy, of you riding a T-Rex as a party gift from Phillips, graphic designer. Sorry, what's his name again?
Sean O'Keefe. Yeah.
Sean O'Keefe. Yeah. Do you have a favorite dinosaur themed beer? Like, naturally, craft beer is just full of puns. Like, puts anybody's dad to shame.
Sarah Hops. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
King
I have to go back to Phillips on this one, just because of like the story behind this, because it was such a silly period in those early days of sour beer production. Like everybody was making them except for Phillips, and a lot of the staff in Phillips really liked sour beers, but Matt Phillips does not like sour beer, and so he was just like, he was kind of, in the early days he was kind of dismissive. He was like, no, like,
it'll blow over.
Totally, it's done. Like it's next year we're not going to be hearing about these things anymore, and so it took some creativity on our part, I think, to come back to him and say, like, here is the story we want to build around a sour beer. Like, what if we isolated some bacteria from around the brewery? Because we had all these, this is at a time when Phillips had like stinky piles of grain falling out of the grain out system that was trying to run. It was running way too far across the brewery, and it was dumping these like, heaps of grain that would sit there, and in the summer months it would start to rot, and it would rot in place, and then somebody would have to come and shovel it back into the bin, and then finally the farmer would come pick it up. And so we went in there, and it was actually Rob Liedl, who was kind of the malting consultant at Phillips to get the system up and running in the early days. Rob and I went out and started poking around in the grain, and he was like, "You're gonna find some good stuff in here if you start to poke around in these composting piles of grain." And so it was like that moment where like the vet is like, or Ellie Sattler in Jurassic Park is like reaching into the pile of Triceratops shit, and so I went in after these bacteria, and sure enough pulled out like a dozen really great souring strains. We managed to whittle it down to just one that was producing really, really beautiful soured wort, and we brought that, but we brewed it out. We brought it back into a QC meeting, showed it to Matt, and he was still just like, "I don't get this." He was just like, "Well, where'd you get it? Like, what? Like, I don't know why we'd want to do this. Where did you get it?" And as soon as we told him, he was like, "Huh." And then from that point, like, Sean and the marketing team and like everybody that would sort of jump into action when something was exciting and fun just did it, and it naturally took off in that direction. They were just kind of, everybody was sort of on board with, even if they didn't like sour beer, they wanted to be part of the story. So that was cool. That was the origin story for Dinosaur back at Phillips, and they're still using that strain as far as I know.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, grain is one of the best. I guess like malted barley seems like a really good natural incubator for lactobacillus, is it not? Like,
yeah, it's a natural habitat for it. So you see it in malting plants all the time. It's all over the place. It'll sour your malt and kill your malt and prevent it from germinating if you're not careful with your steeping process.
I was going to ask you as well, were you there when Phillips was doing the ultrasonic dry hopping?
That was actually my idea.
I was back in the day, and I was like, "It's over, folks. We figured it out." Like,
yeah,
I was gonna.
We were using that system as a sort of a pilot for accelerated aging of whiskey, and that it was hard. Like we were working with Camosun College at the time. There was a chemist there, Blair Surridge, who was just taking lots of samples from us to run chemistry with his students through their GC, their gas chromatograph, and mass spec system. And so we had access to this really, really great tool for doing research. And so we wanted to figure out stuff about, aging of whiskeys and whatever. And, we kind of started looking around at other uses for ultrasonication or sonication. And Yeah, that's so actually they did that beer after I left, but it was using that system. It was really really cool, and it turned out nice. They sent me a can of it in the mail. It was really turned out well, I thought.
Yeah, like there was like basically just using like kind of, you were like pumping into a smaller tank and then like ultrasonically agitating the tank, and then that was like getting more flavor from the dry hops. Is that right? Is that how that was working, or something like
Yeah,
that?
so sonication basically works like everybody's seen an ultrasound like cleaner probably, at the dentist's office. They use these little things
Yeah.
to clean off tools, and it's like an ultrasonic bath. And basically all it is
Right.
it just like creates vibrations that create little bubble implosions that release huge amounts of energy at a really, really microscopic scale. And so those little energy bursts that occur through the sonication process, or their cavitation, it's just like a rotor. It's just like the way that pumps cavitate and create these little bubbles that then kind of burst and release energy. That process, you can harness it for chemical reactions, is the theory. It doesn't have like super widespread use yet, and I don't know like at this point that the science is really there for the food industry yet for most applications, but it is a really great mixer as long as you keep your volumes really small. So you have to do it in a very small enclosed volume space. Otherwise, you can't just like stick an ultrasonic probe into just like a huge fermenter. It won't do anything. It'll just like the sound will dissipate over the big area. So it has to be contained, has to be really small, and the smaller the better, essentially. So that's the kind of the engineering trick with doing ultrasonic type beers.
Sweet. Yeah.
And then I guess you'd have to also you got to create a dosing vessel that's airtight as well.
Yeah.
And doesn't it create a fair amount of heat? Like we've got a little ultrasonic bath that we use for carb stones, and naturally heats up through. For sure. So you need to cool it somehow or get good flow through it. So that's how we were doing our little whiskey pilots, was running lots of flow through so that nothing heated up too much. But cool. Little heat exchanger would go a long way. Neat. Sweet. There we go. Got to daisy chain my little tiny 2 quart ultrasonic into my dry hop loop.
Give it a try. Seriously, throw some hop pellets in there and just like throw them into your bath sometime and just watch them go. Like it really does a cool job of mixing stuff.
Neat.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah.
There you go. I'm sure I could get it airtight with some JB Weld or something.
Seems like a safe project for
now. You're sounding like Matt Phillips.
Yeah. Ingenuity. I like it.
Yeah. Have you, through your process, like at Raft, are you doing any like yeast banking? Have you like kind of like combining your passions or personal interests? Like what fermentation related projects have you done? You obviously, the ultrasonic dry hop is one of them.
Yeah, we get to take part in a lot of different product development projects. I don't get to talk about them much because we have to keep them largely under our hats. But we've been lucky just to get pulled into a lot of different stuff. From the hand sanitizer thing with Annex in the early days. That ended up being this whole like community project with distillers chipping in and all kinds of people. Through to working with the beer guilds and associations to do this sort of analysis of judging data. There's kind of always something going on. Where this year we started doing hops analysis. That's kind of a new thing for us, and has really taught us like a little bit more about that. We already knew lots about the malting world because of our time back at Phillips and working there, but the hops world is always a little bit more of a mystery. So that's been a lot of fun. And it's a bit tricky to talk about because I'm kind of having to step around, people's IP essentially. But I would say kind of taking a more parallel like response path to that question is, we've used like a lot of our connections within the beer industry to like build out what amounts to a pretty huge advocacy organization that has gone national on harm reduction work. And so it's kind of taking this like basic idea that breweries work as supervised consumption sites and safe supply providers. That's what alcohol, that's what regulated alcohol is. That's what a tap room is. And so we went out to a bunch of the breweries that we were working with, and we said, like, what do you guys think about trying to do something that showcases the brewing industry's like inherent rooting in harm reduction philosophy and harm reduction practice, which is about looking after people and making sure people don't get hurt from drug use. And it caught like a house on fire. It was all over the place. It went all the way to Halifax with people signing up and telling us that they would, I've got like a naloxone kit here. They'll like carry a naloxone kit on site, and they'll put a little sticker in their window that'll kind of say, it'll look kind of like this. It'll say, we carry naloxone on site. If you're in trouble, if you got a friend who's in trouble, we can come, we can help. We're here to help you. We're not like gonna vilify you and call the cops. Like we're gonna get out and make sure that the community is looked after. So that was a huge, I think, paradigm shift for the business sector in general, because at that point businesses were kind of, especially in Alberta, we were seeing this like weaponization of business communities against unhoused communities in particular, but people who use drugs more broadly. And they were kind of being put in front of cameras and saying like, oh, we feel unsafe, we're having to spend all this money on smashed windows, we don't like the supervised consumption site, this and that and that. And I think by having a more organized cohort of businesses who are like, no, we don't believe that sort of thing works. We actually want to see people looked after first, and housed and offered housing and offered services and offered healthcare, rather than just having the police chasing them around the city all day long. That really did change, I think, the way that a lot of businesses could approach the communities that were already living around them that had maybe been there before they were. So that was a cool thing we got to do. Yeah.
There can be just a lot of statistics on like with safe supply or things like that, how much things like petty crime, so smash windows or things like that, actually decreases a lot. And
pretty much all of the research shows that.
I mean, breweries and brewery supply companies were naturally in industrial areas that a lot of people seem to seek refuge. Stefan from Humps Connect was actually telling me about a situation where with their warehouse where he had used a naloxone kit that you had given him, and
I like
to a situation. And
those are really nice stories to hear about. And I've talked to Stefan about that, and it doesn't always work out. It doesn't always work out well for people. Like it there's still a lot of death happening around us all the time, and a lot of people have had to really get used to that. I don't think that ever thought they would, but it just being a little bit more empowered has gone a long way for people, and knowing that there's like another group of people that they can reach out to say like, hey, like, what do I do about this situation? How, we've got a tent encampment hanging out in our back alley. Like, what's the best thing for me to do? There's lots of alternate ways to address these sorts of things than simply just calling the cops in. And I think people are looking for those solutions more and more every day right now. So that's been really cool. And that's called Each and Every. Each+Every.org is where people can go and look that up if they're interested. But really got started in the Alberta beer industry at a time when reactionary politics are reaching their peak.
Yeah. Is that like an Alberta-based organization, or is it kind of like a national organization? Should BC breweries and organize, and it's open to other businesses too, or is it just like focused on breweries?
It just started in breweries, but it snowballed really quickly. We have now, I think, over a dozen industrial sectors represented in it, and it's everywhere. It's all pretty much every province and territory now.
Yes, people can check that out. Each+Every.org.
Yeah,
that's where you can find out more about that. And if your business wants to support that, there you go. That's cool. Awesome work on that. Lots of parallels, obviously. Our good friend Chris who Aslan used to work with, was like
Yeah.
heavily involved with harm reduction as well. So
Nice.
yeah, it's near and dear to our hearts for sure.
Yeah.
I think we actually initially met at Portland Hotel Society.
Oh,
Back
nice.
when I was nursing and he was a mental health worker. And then
Yeah.
we met brewing down the road. It's funny.
Oh, that's so nice. Yeah, there is a lot of I think philosophical kinship between those sectors, and it makes sense to me because I think people know that if we were trying to sell unregulated alcohol, like, and we were all working in gangs and stuff right now to do that, to protect our supply chains, protect our turf, to keep it out of the hands of the cops and keep it underground and everything, like there'd be a lot of violence to sustain that sort of situation, and that's what we see in the unregulated drug markets right now. So it's all very unnecessary. We can do a lot better if we just think about this and look at what works, which it largely does in the brewing industry. I've just realized that we've gone all this time without even really properly talking about the beers we had pulled out. Did you guys?
I was just gonna say.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, so I gave you some beers.
So because I like did a quick casual pop into Penticton yesterday, and got to hang out with Aslan or with Darren. He handed me a couple of the neighborhood beers and Squirrel Chaser, and I wanted to.
Oh, you do have Squirrel Chaser. We both.
Yeah, I sure do.
Great.
Squirrel Chaser is very near and dear to my heart. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah,
so
you were saying earlier. Yeah,
like I do want to make a couple of just like notes about Amigos because that's what I was just drinking. So I'm through that can mostly now.
Yeah.
This beer, and I noticed this a couple of years ago when Neighborhood sent us some samples as well. Like, I love some of the Japanese research on lagers, like Asahi Super Dry. Their whole team is like obsessed with the idea of crispness, and so I've seen them present at ASBC conferences and MBA conferences and stuff, and they are really, really obsessed with the idea of like what makes Asahi Super Dry taste so good and feel just right in your mouth and everything. And they've kind of come down to this thing. I think they're saying that they've used the Japanese word is karakuchi, and it kind of refers to like crispness or dryness. And they've actually like figured out the scientific basis for it. And then in 2020, they ran this gigantic campaign worldwide all about this word karakuchi. And it was cool to see like the evolution of it, because they were like really going on about how important like the final gravity and the astringency, those two things together. So what your tannin concentration is combined with what your final gravity is kind of what gives rise scientifically to their definition of crispness. Yeah. And this beer has it. This beer like really, really has it. And I just wanted to flag that because it's like I'm a big like, hopefully this doesn't sound creepy on podcast, but I'm like a big mouthfeel guy. Like I really focus on mouthfeel when I'm drinking a beer, and Amigos like just nails that idea that Asahi was going for.
Nice. Yeah, it's like definitely, I mean, we actually like started naming it like crisp lager because that's like what we wanted. That it's called Amigos crisp lager because we wanted just that crispness to come through, like people to kind of focus on that. And it does have corn in it, which gives it like the sweetness in it, but then like it finishes super dry, which makes it really nice. And we try to carbonate as much as we can possibly carbonate it with still running it through a wild goose canner, and that all helps for sure.
Well, good job.
Thank you.
And then so this is the one that we've all got in front of us is Squirrel Chaser, and I wanted to make sure that this got on the list for today because this beer.
We talked about that when you were at the BC beer conference there. You're like, I love Squirrel Chaser. I'm like, great. It's awesome.
Yeah, for me, this beer occupies a really special place because it came out at a time when hazy beer had made its mark. It was huge. The industry was being overrun with it. And everybody seemed to be making at least one. Some breweries were focusing everything they had on them. But a lot of them in the industry at the time were just really, really, really sweet and unbalanced. And it was like they were responding to what the market had kind of told them they wanted, which was these incredibly fruity, hugely flavorful, really big, sweet tasting beers. And then Squirrel Chaser came along. And I feel like I don't know if it was the first to do it in BC or whatever, but it felt like it was. It provided this, what I think was a bit of a groundswell towards balance again in the hazy market that a lot of breweries are now replicating. So I found it, like, it really knocked my socks off when I first tasted it, because it stood in glaring contrast to a lot of what was on the market and available at that time. And I think this really speaks to the thoughtfulness that Yellow Dog puts into beers. And I've always really appreciated that about Yellow Dog. So yeah, Squirrel Chaser occupies a really special place to me.
Nice. Yeah, I was at Yellow Dog at the time when we were developing that recipe. I think there's no actually, I don't think there's a beer that we've actually done more testing and trial versions of before we did Squirrel Chaser, which seems kind of funny because it's like, it's just a hazy pale ale. Like, there's nothing too crazy about it. Like, it's kind of just the high five hazy IPA just with less base malt in the end. Like, that's really all it is. But Liam was like super focused on it, being drinkable, not being like very sweet, but still being like, all the flavor that you want in a hazy pale ale. At that time it was like us, Yellow Dog, and Twin Sails doing Dat Juice. Like, that was the thing that everyone was kind of like, okay, we've got a hazy IPA. Like, the next obvious jump is like, why don't we do this but 5%? Like, all the brewers are like, well, why don't we do this but less alcohol? We can have 2 of them. And so that's how this beer came about, and trying to change the hops up a bit so that they fit better and like the smaller ABV profile too. Like, not every hop, like, not as bombastic hops don't always work as well on like a lower ABV. So sometimes you like choose some hops that are a little bit not subtle, but like less crazy than like maybe a Vic Secret or something like that. Like something that's a bit more, works well in this kind of ABV. Yeah. But there was a lot of work that went into that at the time, and it's hasn't changed too much over the years, which I think people appreciate. And we still make a lot of it.
It's tried and true. Yeah, and you make it now in Penticton as well, right? Yeah,
we sure do. Yeah,
that's this is the first time we've got a chance to actually talk about Darren's beers on the podcast. One year in, and finally you're getting your own personal plug.
Oh, that's nice. Have you guys covered Main Street before?
We did like a pilot episode. Yeah. Darren interviewed me.
Yeah, awesome. We'll have to do it. We'll just circle back on each other later and pump each other's tires as we go.
That's a good holiday episode.
We'll do the best of. But it's funny, we get to drink our own beers all the time. So the fun part of the podcast is talking to brewers from all over and like trying their beer, and it's a good excuse to try these beers that we don't always try as well, right? We might not always reach for on the stores, if we ever do make it to the liquor store. I think that was interesting what you mentioned, Euan, about how brewers should be like trying other breweries' beers, and it's funny how like
it gets hard. It's like seems like a chore to like walk 3 blocks to the like 4 other breweries that are nearby.
And horror of horrors pay for it. Unbelievable.
For sure. I mean, it's got to be part of the budget. It's got to be part of your sensory team's practice to be comparing yourself to other breweries, and just get one of your sales reps to stop in and drop $60 on beer in the liquor store once a month. If you do it once a month, you will get huge amounts from that, because you're sitting there and you're literally pulling everything off of what it's like on the shelf at a good liquor store that's stocking fresh beer and cold storing all that stuff. So give it an honest look of what a discerning consumer is probably going to see. But you will turn up so much good stuff when you're drinking beers side by side. Pour yourself 4 glasses of the same style of beer, including your own, and see which one you really like the best. And do kind of a blind tasting.
That's a very good point of like grabbing from the shelf, because it's like, man, if I'm gonna drop off beer because I'm boiling some yeast or grabbing a bag of grain or something, I'm making sure it's the freshest, best example And then it's usually going to sit on the shelf anyways, because, like we've got a pretty good collection of beers that have been dropped off for favors here and there. And it's like,
yeah.
I should really set aside a time to taste that properly. And the next thing you know, 3 months goes by.
Yeah.
But trying the beer direct off the shelf with everybody's beers will actually give you a true example, I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You might even find off flavors in your beer that you didn't know were there. Like this is the experience I've seen with some breweries where they're just like, when you said it was like you were picking up DMS before, I couldn't pick it up until I tasted it beside one of our competitors because they don't have it, and we do. Obviously we do, but we're only ever tasting our own beer, so you get totally desensitized to like, the house flavor, as everybody the particular off flavor.
Yeah, and you're trying your beer fresh all the time, right? Especially on draft or like even your cans to go. It's like, it's having it fresh is easy. It's when you go to like, Kamloops, you're like, checking the date code, like, how long has this been there, right? And that's on the shelf, and people are buying it, right? So that's super important to be like, okay, like we set aside cans to cold and warm store every run, so that we go back and be like, okay, like how is this holding up over time? And then, I had talked to Euan about that when he stopped in about, like our goal for me this year is to try and make our beer just taste as good as it can, like, but longer, have a longer shelf life essentially. So, to try to make whatever I can do to tailor the beer to taste better longer that's my goal. So, ideally, like everyone's drinking it fresh.
Residual fan, right?
Yeah, residual fan is one. First of all, making sure your beer is clean, and then residual fan. DO is huge. Like we do a lot of DO checks and stuff like that. But it's like kind of all the basics. But
we
were
talking at the Western MBA thing last week. 2 points. One, that was that DO should be probably registered more as a cumulative as opposed to a final package.
Totally.
So in every step of the way, you're going to typically be picking up 10 to 15. So if you can add those all up cumulatively and you're still under 50, then you're great. Not 50 at package.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I thought was it was kind of a bit of a funny joke, but a good point is like the one presenter was saying, he's like, at our brewery, sales reps don't get a taste beer if it's not at least 2 months old, because that's what they're selling. Like we only talk about and taste beer that's 2 months old.
That's awesome. I like that. It's smart. You got to know your market. If you're selling right out of the tap room all the time, sure, like you probably are selling the freshest beer you can, but it's just not realistic for most people. It's not reflective of most people's experience of your product. So be honest with it. I think that a lot of breweries are kind of growing up to that nowadays. They're more curious about like that possibility and trying to get a handle on what their consumers are actually experiencing, which is really nice to see. I think, there's so many places you can go with that. And I think just like understanding that, coming back to that idea that like consumers probably understand your products as well or sometimes better than you do, and like making sure that you're keeping your ears open for that feedback and finding ways to do that is really, really valuable, in addition to sort of looking at yourself beside your competitors.
So Euan, what excites you about the Canadian brewing industry these days? You have a kind of unique experience of being in Alberta and then BC and then back to Alberta. Like, how do you view the Canadian brewing industry? What's exciting you, and then where can we improve as well?
I think there's this interesting swing back to core beers, which I really like to see. I think that has gotten everybody focused again on quality when they were just like, hey, we're just going to make a one-off, and the next week it's going to be a one-off, and the next week. And so we never have to actually figure out how to make consistent beer. And because they didn't have to worry about consistency, like that as a huge part of quality. now that everybody's back focusing on like core beer lineups and doing, a few things really, really well, they're learning that like they can definitely make award-winning beers. Most breweries can make award-winning beers, but can you make that award-winning beer every time? And that's where, the breweries get separated into the ones who sell lots of beer really easily and the ones who struggle to sell their product. And so this is the thing that I think most excited about in the industry right now, is this like shift towards finally getting our heads. It feels like the real growing up moment for the Canadian craft industry. There's been a huge amount of real estate taken by craft brewers now in almost every province. Like BC, I was looking, Ken Beattie reported 32% of beer sales are going to craft breweries in BC now. Like, that is not a number I thought I would see ever.
Yeah.
But if you had told me that 10 years ago, I would have laughed in your face. That is a huge number. And we're nowhere near that in Alberta. I don't think we're even half that in Alberta yet, but we're probably coming close. And, considering we were at only 10% not that long ago in Alberta, this is really cool to see. So like, we do have to grow up with that though. And I like to see that sort of more mature approach. It is a maturing industry. And with that kind of comes like more discerning, knowledgeable consumers who, again, are going to be feeding you back the information that you need to make decisions around your products. As long as you do it intentionally, do it intelligently, do it with data. But that's kind of the thing, is that maturation phase that we're coming into right now is it sounds boring, but it's actually really exciting, because it means that everybody's getting really, really good at their jobs.
Yeah,
I mean,
we're excited about it. Yeah,
the caliber of beer that I think this is how we've been able to do this podcast and like keep it so genuine and authentic, is like there's so many people to talk to about incredible beer all across Canada, and like from small communities, major hubs, like coast to coast, it's like improving so much. And
well, and I do love this like focus on core beer too, because it was easy to just fart out like a new IPA, just put it out there, and it'd be gone in 2 weeks. Like, when that happens, you don't have to focus on, honestly don't have to focus on quality as much, because it's gone. It's already been drank before any issue has arisen. But as soon as you take your beer and it's sent to the LDB and it's warm stored, and then it goes to who knows where, you're all of a sudden really focused on quality and how is that beer holding up over time, and how is it being treated, and that kind of stuff too. So I love the focus on core and figuring how to make each beer its best possible version of itself too.
Honing in. It's
That's our theme for this year. That's our 2024 theme, I think.
Exactly. You have, much like a lot of people, but have like a bit of a unique intro to craft beer, like getting into the scene, making it your work, your day-to-day. Do you have any advice for anybody who wants to like find a career, or even just like some professional experience in craft beer?
Yeah, I would never advise people to like go and volunteer places to learn the craft. I feel like we've all done too much of that. Like, there's just too much expectation of like interning places and all this in different industries. So, that was my path into the industry, unfortunately, is like having to, show up at breweries, offer free support, free help to like learn the industry. And I look back on that as like having been the right thing for me at the time. But like, I think that there are so many opportunities right now from on my side of things, it's the scientific side of things. I look at the science of beer and I'm like, look at what Omega Labs is doing. Look at what Escarpment is doing. Look at what all of the yeast producers are doing right now. The hops producers, look at the science they're putting into stuff, the R&D effort. I think there's so much cool and exciting research to be done in this field around like everything from like how to generate stable emulsions I talk about emulsions a lot. It's a huge mouthfeel characteristic of like how stable is your emulsion, especially when you're talking about shelf life. Um, you know, like thinking about beer as a food product, a like living food product that's changing over time, that in some cases is getting worse, in few cases is getting better with age, like doing really, really interesting things one way or another as it ages, as it matures, and how to, yeah, like kind of what Darren was just saying, like riffing off of that, like how to get to a point where you can put a beer on a shelf at room temperature for an X number of months and have it not change too much, if that's what you want. But understanding the science behind what you're making to that level that you understand, like what metrics you need to measure in order to get there is, that's the sort of work that's been done in macro brewing for 100 years now, and they understand this stuff. They keep it very guarded. They keep it very close to their chest, but this is kind of where we have to go with craft brewing, because we can do it. It can be done. It's done every day at some of these macro breweries, but they're measuring 30 different things before they sign off on a beer. So like, how do you get there as a craft brewery? This is a huge question for our time, I think, as all these craft breweries start to approach maturity, and want to reach new markets and all that.
Sweet.
That's great.
Yeah, I think the goal isn't always going to be the same for everyone. Like, your size is going to dictate what your goals are. If you're a small brewery in Port Alberni, like, you don't have to worry too much about sending your beer as far aflong, but you don't get to be award-winning as well without focusing on quality from the get-go. So it kind of depends on, how much you want to put into it at the end of the day.
Yeah. Get more scientists involved. That's always going to be my advice. There's so many people coming out of science programs right now that are just like, what do I do with my career? Do I go be a doctor, or do I go into brewing? I don't know. I think the more that they
be a doctor, come on, who do I do that, right?
Yeah, there's lots of room for people in this industry, though. That it's not gonna be what you think. Is the fun part. Is like, I showed up in my first day at Phillips, and I was already tearing apart the canning line, figuring out where a contamination issue was coming from. Back in 2014. It wasn't what I thought I was going to be doing. It's like learning the mechanics of piping and gaskets, and understanding how flow works. I felt like I was learning engineering on my first day.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
figuring out that every deadhead that's past an inch and a half is going to be a potential issue.
Issue. The perfect flow rate for actually cleaning things in a pipe. It's like the right meters per second. I don't know what it is.
Exactly. Yeah. Keeping your turbulent and laminar flow straight.
That's right. Yeah. There it is.
That's why we've got Ian Crooked Eco Labs and Mike at Crew to help figure out all that stuff.
For sure. Yeah, I learned a lot from Ian back in those days too.
Yeah. So what takes out your time outside of the lab? I mean, you're in the process of moving coast to coast, so I mean that's probably a lot. But
yeah, I keep pretty busy. I'm writing a lot. I didn't mention this yet, but on the kind of drug policy side, I write a newsletter that it's kind of like morphing into more like investigative journalism as journalism collapses under our feet. There's just so much that's not being talked about and reported on, and there's so many journalists that just don't even have time to submit freedom of information requests anymore. So this has been a big focus of mine. I've just passed the 100 freedom of information request threshold. I've been really, really busy on that stuff for the last year or two, and putting out stories. Some of it's pretty hard hitting stuff that's been in some big media outlets, and I write at Drug Data Decoded. That is like my main place where I'm talking about drug policy. So yeah, if people are interested in that side of things, I write there. It's been a bit slow lately, just with the move and everything, but there's I've always got something coming up, and there's a lot of stories that I'm working on right now. So for different outlets as well as for Drug Data Decoded, and so yeah, that's like organizing. Just like community organizing has been a big thing over the last few years. Of like when when a protest needs to be done in Calgary, it tends to fall on like a small group of us. So that's been really it's been tough, like in a lot of ways, because there's been a lot of folks that we've lost over the years. But at the same time, like you got to fight in some way somehow. So we've been lucky to have a good community throughout Alberta, just standing up to some of the really tough government measures that have been put in place through these years. So it's been nice to feel kind of empowered a little bit and able to do something about it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Thanks very much for your involvement in your work and never tiring. So if you want something done, if you want something done, give it to a busy person.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. I don't know. I do a lot of dog walking. I got a big German Shepherd mutt who needs a fair bit of distance every day. So that's my head clearing time. And started even I have been playing in a band for the last year and a bit. Obviously,
nice.
More or less parted ways last week with our last show, but that's been a lot of fun. Just something outside of all of it, that you can focus on. It is an artistic outlet, so valuable. I can never say enough of that for people that are just like having a hard time or looking for a good time. It doesn't really matter. Just like find an artistic, creative outlet, and you will never regret that. Yeah, it's pretty important. I know, Darren, you play music pretty regularly, and for myself, I just started in a band again after probably 2 years, and I'm like, whoa, man, I was missing this creative thought so much process. Like,
well, the classic thing of like, creativity begets creativity is like so true too. Like, it's just like once you get that part of your brain going, it just spurns more ideas. Like, your creativity around music, like, oh, I never thought about like doing this with the beer. Like all of a sudden, it just starts happening, right? So,
and then you're like Mickey Mouse and Fantasia,
just like that.
Yeah. Let's hear about what are your band names? Or Darren, are you playing in a band now?
I don't play in a. We're not officially on hiatus, but our band was called The Translators. So if we're on there on Spotify, we have an album. You can go listen to it. But yeah, right now I'm mostly just playing in church, and that's it right now.
Current band doesn't have a band name.
Getting there.
Previously,
that's way too cool.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. We're all just trying to figure out what our sound is. I'm like, man, I haven't done vocals in a while. This is I used to yell in a hardcore band, so it was
nice. What was that called?
It was called Balance.
Cool.
It's on Spotify as well. Deep Dark Truth.
Excellent.
What's your band name? Now I got a full sweep here.
Yeah, they're called Pit Props. So very a couple of English guys I met about a year and a bit ago, and we just hit it off. Just really, really good time together, good friends, and the music was almost just a bonus on top of that.
That's great. It's so fun. It's amazing. Like much like craft beer, like it's like the community you end up creating through music. It's just like so incredible and meaningful. Get like
so rewarding.
Get a bit of a global community, whether you're like traveling or whatever. Well, Euan, thank you so much for your time. It's
been a pleasure.
Pleasure. I'm gonna try not to stay up too late worrying about all the potential contamination points that I haven't swabbed in the past 48 hours.
Yeah.
Well, if you're having trouble, just pick up your guitar. You know how to calm yourself. You get there.
Yeah.
Lots
of. And thanks for stopping it in Penticton as well.
Yeah,
it's nice to see you.
It was so nice. Yeah, that was great. Thanks for having me in, and thanks for thinking of this, you guys. This is really nice to be able to do, and I just appreciate everything that you guys are doing for the industry in BC. I don't think you probably don't hear often enough how valuable this sort of thing is for people to know that they are a part of something bigger, and so just keep doing it as long as it's fun. and it doesn't feel like too much work for yourself. But you're doing a good thing here, so please keep it up for as long as you can.
Oh, you're too kind.
So sweet. Oh, thank you so much, Euan. Yeah, until next time.
Yeah, well, until next time, everyone. Cheers.
Cheers.